Square Enix invited me out to play Final Fantasy 16, and across the day's session I got hands-on with the game. I learned so much about every feature we had access to, and now I'm going to bring you guys along for the ride. I've done a general overview, and now it's time for the deep dives where I go over everything with a microscope. We did combat first, and now it's time for a special part of the combat, the Eikon fights. The reason this is getting its own video is because there's so much to talk about. The difference between the Eikons, the fights against them, Eikon versus Eikon fights, and even more. Now, before we jump into all the juicy details, down in the description is the playlist for FF16, where you can find all my deep dives for the game from the entire day's play session I got to experience, so be sure to check that out and make sure you hit that like button while you're down there. Now, let's talk about Eikons in Final Fantasy 16 and what sorts of battles we can experience. Firstly, what Eikons are there? We have Odin, Phoenix, Bahamut, Ramu, Garuda, Titan, and Ifrit. During the hands-on, we got to experience 3 Eikon fights. This can be broken down into Clive versus Demi-Eikon, where it's traditional human versus human. The second is Clive versus Eikon, where we are fighting a giant version of the Eikon itself. And lastly is Eikon versus Eikon, where we control a transformed Clive to battle against another Eikon in a truly earth-destroying battle where the environment is destructible, and it really highlights the power of these beings and how they can reshape the world around them. So let's start with the demi-human form before we get to the best parts. Firstly was Benedicta in a semi-Garuda transformation. She had the powers of Garuda such as wind control and flight, but overall was still human. But there were attacks where she would channel giant talons to rip the building apart and throw it at us. She would take Garuda's traits and really amplify them by rushing around the arena before getting close and nasty with her claws. During this fight, Clive is normal. We fight with our normal Eikon abilities and sword. This is a pretty normal style of boss fight in general that contained a nice mix of close and long range attacks with some of the new cinematic actions involved in the fight. Cinematic actions are part of boss battles where the game will seamlessly go from combat to cutscene. For example, Benedicta might fly off from the battle arena and it transitions straight into her summoning giant Garuda claws to destroy the surrounding area. Or she might suddenly lunge at you and try to sink those claws straight into your neck. These cutscenes really don't take away from the experience like some people might think. Instead, they amplify it and really get you involved in the characters and how tough the fights are. We no longer have these two-dimensional fights, which are just hit, dodge. Instead, we have a truly wonderful cinematic experience mixed between normal combat and ATE style combat. During some of these small cutscenes, you will have 3 button prompts that can pop up. I don't know if there's going to be any more different kinds in the full game, but we had access to 3 of them. The first is a dodge prompt by pressing R1. In the above example, this was used whenever Benedicta tried to throw buildings at us. Then we have the counterattack prompt with the square button. This is used when she lunges at you. Clive will slightly move to the side and absolutely slam his sword straight down on her in the most brutal but awesome looking way possible. And the third way was a button mash event, and even though I say button mash, it really wasn't that bad. I could simply press square using my thumb and had no issues with beating it. This is used during clashes where each other are trying to overwhelm the other, basically. I know some people have issues with ATEs in general, but please don't worry. It's not a traditional ATE, and they don't seem to be that often because the game is seamless. You won't even really notice them as you go in and out of cutscenes and fights without any graphical or audio changes. So it's almost like you're actually just constantly in a state of gameplay. And I'll be perfectly honest, it looks incredibly cool when you actually see it in action. Now, let's talk about the second form of Eikon fights. This is Clive versus the Eikon itself. A normal human Clive versus a giant destructive being capable of altering the landscape itself. And they do just that. In our trial, we fought Garuda. Claws coming straight for us, giant pieces of earth just being ripped out of the ground and thrown at us, and massive giant swirling tornadoes just trying to rip us to shreds. We have to block and dodge while trying to bring her down. And what makes this a unique experience is the stagger system. Beat on her enough and she would topple over, but that's not everything done and dusted. Then we have ways to really bring the pain. By channeling Garuda's unique Eikon ability ourselves, we can dig our own claws right into her and really slam her down to the ground in the most dominant way possible. And then we get a few seconds to really lay down the damage. The cinematic actions are strong in these fights, and you're going to be dodging a lot and countering a lot. The good thing though is this is only the Garuda fight. Before we got to play, we learned a little bit more about the other Eikon fights, like how they are all different and unique to each other. The Garuda fight is indicative of a wrestling match, which it really is. It's a constant back and forth of carnage and destruction, showing off Garuda's crazily destructive nature. But what about other Eikons? Well, Phoenix is more of a side-scroller shooter like Panzer Dragoon. This is an example of just how different fights will be, instead of just a skin change for the Eikon, with the fights functioning the same way, which I do love. The Garuda fight was amazing, to say the least, but if we had to do that 5 or 6 times with only slight changes between them, I can see it getting a little less exciting the more it goes on, as each fight would essentially be a clone of each other. So I'm really happy to see this change and mix up. But now, let's move on to the best thing I experienced during the entire day. And that's Eikon versus Eikon. We got to fight Garuda while controlling Ifrit. These fights are totally different. Ifrit had 3 attacks: a claw attack, a charge attack, and the ability to launch a giant fireball. What really makes this so different though is how destructible the environment and the Eikon bodies are. We are literally burning the world around us, ripping the earth up and smashing the trees into charcoal. We create craters when Garuda slams us into the ground, and we destroy entire forests when we launch Garuda across the wilderness. And because we're the personification of Hellfire, we burn Garuda alive. Literally. You can see her feathers set alight and burn as we claw her like a wild beast. There's no real emotion in these fights. It's just pure destruction on a massive scale. But oh my god, does it look amazing. The cinematic actions come in again here, but are a little more prevalent than before. These fights are half gameplay, half ATE cutscene. But again, the seamless nature means you don't leave the action for a second, and is hands down the coolest thing I've seen in a game for a very, very long time. It really fits and highlights the destructive nature of Ifrit. Limbs being ripped off quite literally as well. There's nothing like seeing Garuda slam us down to the ground before using those sharp talons to claw our arm off, and then we watch it regrow, starting with the bone and the tendons, then the flesh. It was so detailed and vivid the entire time. My mouth was just open in such a wow, this is amazing. Once we beat Garuda as well, we had no control over Ifrit. It was going crazy, showing a complete lack of control, and it took another Eikon, Ramu, to stop the rampage that we were about to erupt onto the world. But again, different Eikons, different fights. This was the very definition of a wrestling match. We were right in each other's faces, doing everything possible to inflict as much pain and destruction on the other that we could. But what about Titan? What about Bahamut and Odin? How are those fights going to go? And in what environment are the fights going to be in? How destructive? How crazy? And so on and so forth. Like, the biggest question I was left with, though, is will we fully learn how to control the power of Ifrit? That, so far, is the biggest question I have, and the one I'm most excited for about the answer. But I leave the question to you guys now. What do you think about these fights? Are you excited for them? Are you looking forward to the destruction? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, hit that like button while you're down there. If you don't, Garuda's gonna come for you. And of course, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming deep dives into FF16. The next one is going to be based on just how truly dark and grim the game gets. As always though, everybody, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.